All right, hey there, folks. I hope everyone's doing well and it's ready to have some fun. Well, it's been great to get back out there doing conventions and readings and seeing everyone in person again. But since we can't go to them all, I figured I'd keep bringing book tour to you. So welcome to Russ's Rockin Rollercoaster, Season 8, Intriguing Interviews with Creative Minds. Now, for those of you who have been watching this show or reading my books, knows about me, it's that I love mysteries. I mean, I love them, love them, love them. But these kinds of stories can be inherently complicated and require some real thought, some skill, some planning, and maybe even a little bit of luck to pull them all together. That's why tonight we'll be diving into Mindfuckers, How to Create a Great Mystery. On our panel tonight is my pal and the best looking guy in crime fiction, Bruce Coffin, a former detective sergeant in Maine. Bruce is the award-winning author of the Detective Byron Mysteries, and his short fiction appears in a number of anthologies, including the Best American Mystery Stories of 2016. Welcome back, Bruce.
Thank you, my friend. Cheers to everyone watching.
All right. Also back on our panel tonight is my favorite Valley girl, Mickey Browning, a former police officer and FBI National Academy graduate. Mickey writes the Colorado Book Award-winning Joe Wyatt Mysteries and the Agatha-nominated and award-winning Mur Cavallo Mysteries. Welcome back, Mickey.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Russ.
All right, good to see you. And last but not least, rounding out our panel is my pal, Christopher D Abbott. Chris is a writer of crime, fantasy, science fiction, and horror, including his ongoing Sherlock Holmes stories published in the fantastic Watson Chronicles. Welcome back, Chris.
Thanks, Russ. It's a pleasure to be back.
All right. All right. Just a heads up to the folks at home. Feel free to send me any notes or questions you have for the panel in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right, so when you guys first started writing mysteries, did you know from the outset that you wanted to write a mystery, or did the mystery kind of find you? Bruce, what do you got?
You know, the mystery was what I was going to write. It had been 30 years, I think, since I'd written any fiction, any type of fiction. And when I realized that I was interested in actually doing something creative again in the writing field, I just honestly started writing. And I didn't even know what a police procedural was at that point. I had no idea. And of course, I'd grown up reading mysteries, probably like everyone, starting back with the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew and all that stuff, and worked my way up. But I really had no idea what I would write. And I think for me, it was just sort of an exercise. And I began writing what would end up becoming the Detective Byron character and the people that surrounded him, his crew, really. I didn't even have, the names weren't even the same at that point. So next thing I know, I'm writing mysteries.
Right. Okay, cool. Do you think that, to me, it feels intuitive, but in a weird way, maybe it wasn't. So, I mean, you were, a police officer for so long. Was it just sort of intuitive that that's where you would go, or it was sort of, did that sort of, all that experience and those instincts just sort of like kind of just well up and kind of kick in on their own?
I think probably the latter. I mean, intuitive and my creative thing just sort of happens. I don't know if there's any thought that goes into it. I think the well had just filled up. I was probably mentally approaching that time where I knew I would retire. And it might have been a cathartic exercise, really, when I started doing it. And then suddenly I fell in love with writing the characters and setting the scene. So it became something other than what I imagined.
Okay. Mickey, so same question.
I knew I wanted to write a police procedural, and that's what I started out to do. And I didn't have the skill to pull it off. I was trying to put too much reality into the story, and it really bogged it down. So I actually had to kind of change direction and focus on an amateur sleuth, so that I learned how to dribble the law enforcement aspect into it.
Right.
I knew they were going to be mysteries, but it took me a little bit to figure out really, how to put it all out there structurally. And so by having the amateur sleuth, it really helped me figure out what kept the story moving at a pretty quick clip. Right. And so while I have, the original story that will never see the light of day, which is a good thing. You know, by the time I did figure it all out, my debut actually was nominated for an Agatha. So it took a lot of study to get there, but it still benefits me to this day.
Right. So it almost sounds like the sort of like the ex-cop in you, like you almost had to get out of your own way.
I did, very much so. Because by gosh, after 22 years of learning all this stuff, everybody was going to know it, whether they needed to or not.
That's right. That's right.
And so, you know, that doesn't work for a story.
That's
you
right.
need
I know things, and you have to know that I know.
And therefore, you are going to know it too.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's
you know, but that's not good storytelling.
Right.
And so, it was kind of a painful lesson, but it was one that really stuck with me.
So in a way, it sounds like you had to focus almost more on what to leave out than what to put in.
Very, very true. And the way that I actually learned how to do that was by something that Earl Stanley Gardner had recommended, and that was to plot from the point of view of your antagonist and then write from the point of view of your protagonist. So you know what's going on.
Oh, you're jumping ahead of my questions. Oh, look at you.
Yeah, overachiever.
Always. All right, Chris. So you, for the most part, have really made your bones writing Sherlock Holmes. So, you know, with the mystery, did you say, hey, you know what, I want to write mysteries, or did you stumble into it? Like, what was the entry point into the mystery writing?
For me, it was after I'd been watching the Granada TV Sherlock Holmes television series and the David Suchet Poirot television series in the 90s. I sat down and I thought, I would like to write a story like that. And this was before I'd read any of the original Conan Doyle or even Agatha Christie's stuff. I'd literally just watched those TV shows and decided, I would, how much fun it would be to be able to write something like that. And I had no idea how to do it, or even if it was possible for me to do it. But I sat down and I wrote just the dialogue for Sir Lawrence Dies was the first book I wrote. And I just wrote the dialogue. I had the scene set, and I just wanted to have my detective, who was going to be a scientist in the 1930s. So a psychologist, but not really a psychologist because they weren't really known then, but, certainly somebody who had psychology as a skill set. And an inspector from the police force that would work together, and the inspector was not going to be an idiot, like a lot of these inspectors generally are portrayed as idiots. You wonder how Scotland Yard managed to function with the amount of people in them that apparently couldn't solve a crime. But and I did that, and I sat there and wrote dialogue and tried to sort of imagine scenes like they were on the television, and that's how I started writing, more like script writing, really. But later on, I developed the ability to flesh them out. But my first crime story was very difficult for me because, in the end, I had to come up with a process, and that process was very simple. I wrote the beginning. I wrote to around 40 or 50,000 words. Then I wrote the end. And then I came back and bridged between that middle and end. So that I definitely had a beginning, middle, and end to the story. The thing is, I didn't know the ending. So I wrote 5, where there were 5 people in it. Each one of them could have done it. So I just wrote 5 different endings. I don't do that now. I'm a little better, more practice now. But back then I wasn't. And then by the time I got to the point where my protagonist my detective is going to explain what happened, I had the pick of 5 endings and ended up making a 6th. But yeah, that was really how it came together.
So once again, you jumped the queue. So which is my next. You've already answered my next question. So I'm jumping all the way over to Bruce now, because the two of you really just blew my whole thing. So when crafting a mystery, so Bruce.
Yes.
Where do you start? The character, the setting, the big reveal? For you, what comes first?
Every book is different. I think, we've talked a lot about the debut. For me, the first one really, the 2.5 years I spent that some people might consider wasted writing the drawer novel, for me was about figuring out who the character was or who the characters were. And that really, for me, was very important because I knew if there ended up being a series, it had to be a character that I was interested in enough that I could write them, hopefully in such a way that the readers would also have that same interest. But once that first book that was published, Among the Shadows, was done, for me, it was simply trying to come up with a different type of story, a different way of solving the crime, something that just didn't exist in the prior recipe. And I think every book really is that way. Somebody told me early on, don't try to outdo yourself from the last book. Try to write a book as good as the last one. And I think I'm pretty sure I speak for other writers. There's a competitive nature where it doesn't matter if you're competing against others or yourself. I think you still try to outdo yourself with the next project. You try to improve on what you've done, and hopefully you throw curves at the reader that aren't repetitive. To me, I think that's always the key.
All right, so there's all sorts of mysteries, right? Told in all sorts of ways in various subgenres and settings. So, Mickey, how important is the mood and the world building to a great mystery? How much of the rules of your tale need to be established early on?
I think the world building and the rules might be two different things.
They are.
The world building and the mood, I think, go hand in hand. And I think it's very important. For example, in Shadow Ridge, which was the first of the Joe Wyatt series, I knew I wanted it to be very cold, very stark. And that played into everything for me. And so being set in Colorado, it was very easy to do. It was a very cold, bleak winter. And that tends to kind of just set the mood, whereas my other series, Maricavallo, is set in the Keys, which is, for some people, it's paradise. It's the Florida Keys. You're warm, and that's where she had escaped to after being an Arctic researcher, simply to get warm, and shenanigans ensued. But I really think that if you don't take advantage of your setting, you're really missing a key component, because even the setting of a particular scene can impact how things are looked at.
That's right.
Dennis Lehane, this was really, a kind of a milestone moment for me when I had read one of his scenes set in a child's playground, and it was his childhood friends, and they were all together, and they were drunk, but just the juxtaposition of where he had decided to set that particular scene really drove it home for me about how critical it is to really integrate that into your story.
For sure. So, Chris, in particular, you write Sherlock Holmes. How important is it to sort of establish that setting and that world building, or is it critical for you? Is it not? How does it play into what you do?
Oh, it's critical, because for me, I try my best to produce as traditional a Sherlock Holmes story as practicably possible. So I do my best to emulate the original writing. So the setting has already been laid out for us by Conan Doyle, and so it's important that you revisit that and you make sure that you are trying to express the same thing, but equally I have to give it a little twist for the 21st century, and not in the sense to add things from the 21st century, but certain vernacular, certain descriptive stuff has to be relevant that people would understand now, especially younger readers, because some of the way things were described in 1880 is fine for us who've been reading those stories since we were children and probably had to look up certain things. Kids today, younger people today are a little bit more likely to just get lost in some of those more detailed and descriptive stuff that really doesn't have any bearing or relevance to what's happening now. And I've even found myself reusing or changing certain wordings to make sure that it doesn't become too difficult for people to understand, or at least stop them while they're reading. But the setting, I try and change my setting every story, so it's not always in London, not always in the same place. And that's important to me too. Some of it is about where I would like to go. And so I took Holmes to Egypt because I have a fascination for Egypt and so on. But it's very, very important that people believe the world is real, even if the people in it aren't, And so I try and add elements of reality into my period position.
I think you said it just right. The world has to feel real, even if the characters aren't.
Absolutely.
That's spot on. I would agree with that. All right. So Bruce, I got one for you. So mysteries are fundamentally about uncovering secrets and the lengths that someone will go to keep that secret a secret. So for you, how much about writing a great mystery is about searching for and following clues, and how much of it is about putting those pieces together?
I think it's a balancing act. And before I answer this question in detail, I want to say that I'm stealing Mickey's idea. She said shenanigans ensued, and somewhere I'm going to either write a short story titled that, or write a book titled that. I love that title. That's awesome. But I think it's a balancing act. I mean, I think you kind of have to do both. I try to, people always ask, how did you learn to write a mystery? And I'm like, I think I learned the way everyone else did, with the exception of the fact that as a detective, you spend your entire career doing that. You're trying to get to the bottom of things. And there are usually multiple suspects when you're investigating a homicide case. And there are, viable, all kinds of things happen. People lie, people establish alibis that aren't real. They'll have other people lie for them. Things that seem a certain way as the case evolves become something entirely different. So I think looking back at all those things that used to frustrate me as a detective and the people I worked with is a real good way for me to draw on the things that make for a good mystery reading and good mystery writing. Those are the things that, you talk about red herrings from a writer's perspective. That's just a good thing.
You're jumping my cue. Don't do that again.
But I mean, you don't need to make that up as a writer. People just, in a real life investigation, they're everywhere because, it's that we always joke about that old adage. If I'm out looking for who was the guy that was killing all the women that drove a VW bug? The good-looking guy was a ski instructor. I can't remember his name now. Anyway, the real-life serial killer. As soon as you start looking for a VW bug, and I guarantee you haven't seen one in months, they'll be everywhere. They're everywhere. They're absolutely everywhere. And that's just one of those things that happens in real life.
All right. So you brought up, I'm going to have to jump ahead because you guys are screwing up my whole thing. You know what? This is what you get. God damn it. All right.
That's it. Ted Bundy.
All right, that's it. So red herrings are a key element of mystery fiction. Bruce, some mysteries give you too many red herrings or send you down a very complicated rabbit hole that's too hard to follow. What's the right ratio for you of red herrings versus plausible suspects?
For me?
Yeah.
I think it just has to make sense. I think it's like everything you do when you're writing, you can't go too far astray. You have to, it's the right amount of ingredients for the recipe. I think there are times as you're reading the book where it's the perfect point to drop something that either misdirects the reader or pulls them in a direction different from where they thought the story was going to go. And you do that in concert with what happens with the characters that are doing the investigation. In Chris's case, if it's Sherlock Holmes, the same thing. Holmes should be discovering that information at the same time as the reader does. So it might surprise the reader as it surprises Holmes. I just think that's a good way to go about it. I don't think you want to overdo anything. I don't think you should be even, as a writer, I don't think you should try to count how many times you give somebody a red herring. I think it just has to naturally flow as the investigation, reveals itself.
All right, Chris. So you got so Bruce invoked Sir Holmes. So what do you think? Talk to me about red herrings.
I think it's a lot easier when you're writing Holmes stories from the perspective of Watson, because he can get kerfuddled by the data and and unconsciously give you the red herrings by saying, oh, it's this way, isn't it, Holmes? And Holmes not disagreeing with him, even though it isn't that way. And I found that's been a very useful tactic for me, because in giving the reader information where Watson believes this is the answer, and Holmes not necessarily saying it's not the answer, it allows for him to explore something which later on, of course, becomes totally untrue to the story. But what I've tried to do with red herrings is a little different, is that I've tried to make them less like a left turn, where you're taken somewhere completely different, well, you know, shaking my hand here, but doing something over here that you can't see. I've tried to be less like that. And I've tried to be more in the case of that Watson will come up with a very plausible solution, and try and run with it. And in any respect that it could have been the answer. And so that's when I write my home stories, when Watson is doing his, this is what I think, it's plausible. It's very probable that this could have been the answer. So it's not necessarily a red herring as such, but of course, you know, you do dangle little clues here and
Well,
there.
it's a red herring in the sense that as the author, you know,
yes,
that's not the answer. But that's
right.
that's an interesting kind. I hadn't thought of it like that before. The idea that one character could submit a possibility, and another character who maybe has more insight or knows the answer just doesn't disagree.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's sort of an interesting way to do it. Like, and maybe even in the case of Holmes, maybe he can see Watson's logic in that logic, maybe either already knows or strongly suspects that it's not right, but maybe at that moment is not even 100% sure.
Right.
And sort of saying, you know what, before I say anything, I want to kind of poke around a little bit more, and then I can get to it. That's an interesting, I hadn't thought of it like that. I like that. That's good. All right. So Mickey.
Yeah, if I can piggyback on
Please.
Chris's, that's an investigation. I mean, it's, if you have a major investigation at the police department, you're going to have multiple opinions about what's going on. And it's very easy for one person to get into some sort of a confirmation bias where it's like, well, this seems to be the issue, and therefore everything that I gather is I'm going to look at it through that lens. So it's actually very helpful to get these other ideas about what's going on. So as you're writing these mysteries, I think it's very organic that you have all of these different possibilities coming up. They're not necessarily a red herring, but it's something that has to be addressed as an investigator, because that's what investigators do.
Yeah.
And at least when you're talking about any sort of a police procedural. Now, you know, like Christopher said, you know, I'm doing something over here so that you don't see this over here. There's still a little bit of bait and switch by an author, but I don't know that, I mean, even if you tried to pin me down, I don't know that I could quantify how many times I'm going to do that per book.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so Mickey, let's stick with you. So let me ask you, so do you prefer your mysteries to be murder mysteries, or just mysteries involving missing persons, big conspiracies, or other unanswered questions fundamental to the narrative?
You know, I think that other crimes can drive a mystery, but darned if somebody doesn't always end up dead in my books.
I know, I'm the same way.
It just happens.
It does. I know. Mine never start out as murder mysteries ever, and they always end up that way. All right. So Bruce, what about you? Do you prefer to kind of go in with the idea of this is going to be a murder mystery, or is murder not important to each narrative? What do you think?
You know, I think it depends on what it is you're setting out to do. My editor would have required that it be a murder mystery every time, but you know, as we all know, I think when it comes to police investigations, as long as the stakes are high, which they always are with a murder mystery, Harlan Coben pulls off brilliantly. You know,
Yes.
the kidnapped person or the missing person, and you can obviously carry an entire novel with that. It becomes the ticking clock, and is the person alive or not alive? I think it's a question of stakes. And one of the things that really plays well, I think, with a lot of the books that we read, and hopefully the ones we write, is when it is a murder case, everything is on the line. Emotionally, the stakes are high for the victim's family or friends. The stakes are high for the investigators to actually solve the puzzle and bring the killer to justice. And everybody who's attempting to thwart that effort, the stakes are very high for as well. So I think it's really hard to beat that unless it's some kind of a kidnapping story or something like that.
All right, so I want to go back. So Mickey, this next question, I'm going to start with you because you brought it up a little bit earlier. So many mysteries focus on detectives, private detectives, nosy journalists. In what way does your protagonist shape the kinds of mysteries that they try to solve and how they go about solving them?
Not sure. I'm following you there.
So if you're a police detective or a private eye, or even like an investigative journalist, you're going to sort of approach your mystery in a certain way. Like if you're a cop, you have a gun, you have a badge, you can legally do stuff. But if you're not,
right,
you can't just
Miracavallo, was a marine biologist. She got thrown into investigating something just because she was trying to figure it out for herself. As an academic, she was caught up in a missing person, a person who had disappeared while on a dive underwater at 100 feet. And they were part of a paranormal scuba team, which actually exists, believe it or not. But
a paranormal scuba team.
Yep.
Wow, that's not a phrase you hear every day.
No, it's not. But she's an academic, and people are trying to ascribe the situation as a paranormal event, and she's like, no, this doesn't jibe. But the evidence that she sees, and she's a very rational, very analytic person, she can't reckon it. And so she approaches it using many of the same things that Sherlock Holmes did, as far as being deductive reasoning and rational and observation and things like that. Whereas a police officer who is doing an investigation, they might not be doing it for the same reasons, but they often follow, the same sort of protocols, but to a more professional level, because they are professional investigators.
And they're legally held to a different standard as well.
They are very much so. But they also have a lot of advantages as far as databases and technology, and being able to call for mutual aid if necessary, or go up, to the feds. And, the bigger the agency, the more toys.
That's
and, sometimes you need that.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot more options available than somebody who's just trying to muddle through an investigation based on their wits has.
That's right. I talk about I reference this often in my Harvick books, that she says, I'm not a cop. I don't have a whole team that can give me supplies and information whenever. I don't just make a phone call and the stuff there. I got to call in favors, or I got to go find it myself. And anyway, all right. So Chris, I got a question to start with you.
Yep.
So when crafting a great mystery, is it important to create a great villain in a cat and mouse type of a narrative? Or do you prefer mysteries where the ending is satisfying as long as we learn that the perpetrator had a valid motivation for doing whatever it is they did, whether or not their reasoning was rational?
Well, that's a very good question. I've written 11, 12 Sherlock Holmes stories now, so I can say that there are instances of both in my stories. I think ultimately I try to find a good villain, one that is a foil for Holmes, because ultimately if it's not a good villain and the mystery itself is not fulfilling for him, he's not going to be interested in it. So that's an important factor in Holmes's psyche, that it has to be something that's interesting, and it has to be something that's been created by an intelligent mind. And so I think predominantly, I would say my villains have to be at least as clever in some respects as Holmes in order to excite him enough to want to investigate.
Right, right. That's right. That's one of the big things, right, with Holmes is sort of, if it doesn't rise to his sort of like level of intellectual curiosity, then it's just it's worthless to him. He won't get out of bed.
His view is, if the police can solve it, why should I?
Right.
Yeah.
Fair enough. All right. So so Bruce, talk to me. What do you think? Is a great villain critical to a mystery, or is it just sort of the, is it the journey?
I think it can be both. In some of my books, I've had it where the person, the antagonist is actually right in the middle of what's happening, hiding in plain sight and actually attempting to control the narrative and the way things unfold to stay hidden. But I think in other times, desperation can be just as great a motivator for your antagonist. One of the things I enjoy doing, and I think some of this is because some of it's real life occasionally, but it also makes more of an interesting story for me to tell, is when the person that actually is being chased isn't all bad or the master criminal, but actually just an average person.
Yep.
Who's either made some very poor decisions to try and solve something or to equalize something or to get out of something. And now they found themselves in that position where they are responsible for another person's death. I like the idea of sometimes of being able to sympathize with the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes any sense. It just,
Absolutely.
we all love that master criminal. We love, the Silence of the Lambs type stories. I think because that's almost that supernatural element of what human nature can be, but it's also sometimes just the average person can fall into a horrible trap because of whatever it is they're into, and they end up being the person that's pursued by your main characters.
That's right. So Bruce, I'm going to stick with you because you touched on this a little bit before, and I want to dive into a little bit more. So mystery fiction often puts our protagonists in danger at one point or another. How much of the danger aspect is important to you when crafting a mystery? Does the danger factor make the victory, if there even is one, more satisfying because it felt more earned?
I think it's important because it ups, again, it's one of those things that ups the stakes. If it's just your typical, we're going along and we're solving the mystery and you're never in jeopardy, I think that becomes boring for the reader. But I think it's a fine line. It's a tightrope you have to walk as a writer, because you run the risk if the danger is a result of the actions of your protagonist and it's constant, that professionalism that Mickey talked about is gone. Mm-hmm. You can't keep racing into things half-cocked and expect the readers to buy that. So I think you really have to be careful about that. I like the idea that the closer they get to solving the crime, the more danger there is for the investigators. Right. But I think you have to be careful not to fall into that trap where people are falling down at a convenient time, or they're going into something by themselves when you wouldn't do that. That kind of stuff. So
yeah.
Oh, for sure. So Mickey, same question. And again, this is also coming from someone who you were in law enforcement, so now that you're transitioned to the fiction side, talk to me about the danger aspect within a mystery.
Well, I think if you've done a good job and your reader cares about your characters, particularly your protagonist, it becomes more meaningful. It'll keep them turning the pages. It is something that I think is expected in a murder mystery, not to be trite or anything like that, but as Bruce said, that there is this escalation of danger. If you come to a conclusion on your investigation and you know who the suspect is, and suddenly, they know they've been made.
Wait, so if I know that you know that you know that I know that I know that you know,
and then everybody knows, and all's good. No, but there's a natural danger, and I think what happens a lot of times is that people don't really understand the repercussions of lashing out, and if they don't want to go to jail, they're just thinking, I don't want to go to jail. They're not thinking that they're making their particular situation worse by fighting or taking on the police or things like that. So oftentimes the escalation of risk is inherent to the story. It's not manufactured at all. It's just the way it truly plays out in life.
Right. All right. So Chris, I got a question. I'm going to start with you because to me, this is a Holmes question as much as anyone else. So one element of mystery fiction I find really exciting when done well is when the hero, the investigator, whoever's reading, leading the charge, has that aha moment and figures, even if they don't figure out the whole crime, they figure out something really important. But sometimes they can come across as being a bit too smart or figuring things out a little too easily. Do you prefer mysteries where the detective just sort of picks up on details that everyone else misses or knows how to assemble the pieces, or those who figure things out through sheer doggedness, where persistence paid off more necessarily than intellectual brilliance?
Oh, sheer doggedness. Absolutely. Prior to the Holmes books, I wrote Sir Lawrence Dyes and Dr. Chandrick Dyes, and this is an inspector called the Bulldog, and he isn't necessarily intellectually brilliant, but he is very thorough in his investigation. He follows his procedures very well, and he's just long in the tooth and long in his investigation, and doesn't skip anything that he checks. And it can be dull and boring, but he gets there because of that process of checking every single box, whereas the other guy kind of flits about all over the place, and it frustrates him that this guy is just, like you said, dogged in his investigation. Nope, that's not the way we have to do it this way. We can't go to C before we've gone to B, and even my detective says to the inspector, that you're like a train that has to get to every station. I can get off a train, get in a balloon, come back, get back on the train, but you have to stay on the train. And I like that. So I think, in answer to your question, I like the idea that the story takes us through this long process of being able to resolve the crime. And sometimes, of course, the ending can be a little like, oh, was that it? And sometimes it can be, oh, wow, that was really clever. And we obviously try for the second, but sometimes the first does happen. But no, I think I prefer a dogged investigation.
Bruce, what about you?
Again, I feel like I'm being ambiguous here, but I feel like that's one of those, you can kind of go both ways with that. I intentionally set up my Byron character to be that dogged detective. Diane Joyner, his second, is exactly the same type of person, in that they really spend most of their time knocking down those roadblocks that get in the way of a common sense investigation. But at the same time, someone who's done that job, probably 90% of police work and investigations is learning human nature, paying attention to what people do, what people say, how they think. And it really almost gives you the advantage in that you know when someone's being dishonest.
Right.
When someone's trying to deflect. That doesn't necessarily mean that you solve the case with that, but you use those things to your advantage to move things forward.
I thought the cop's mentality was that you just assume that every word that someone says is a lie until you know that it's true.
There's there's a book about that, because everybody does lie about something at some point, but it's just a question of trying to figure out
as well.
That's true. That is true. Like my mother said, just because you didn't do this one time, you probably still deserve punishment for the ones you got away with, which is very true. So,
but no, I know you didn't burn that. You may not have burned that building down, but I do know that you killed that guy.
Right. But I think there's a mixture between being dogged and also I like the inner dialect that you can throw in there or in a dialogue and use that as a way to show what the detective is thinking as they're dealing with people in the book.
Right. All right. So, Mickey, I don't know if you've ever written them this way, but I'm curious your thoughts about what's your take on the closed room type of mystery where all parties are essentially trapped in one secured location?
Oh, I really admire people who can write that well. It's I don't know. Although I just found that Adrift, my first book, was listed on this database of closed room mysteries because the crime actually occurred at depth at 100 feet underwater. And so they considered that a closed room mystery. And I never considered that I had written one of these. So I guess I guess the definition is a little bit wider than, and then there were none by Agatha Christie. So
I'm writing a closed room novel.
They're fascinating.
It's hard.
It's hard. It's
tough,
hard work.
Having done two myself, it's you have to do a little bit more work than you would normally do in order to get that to work. I mean, I decided a long time ago that I wanted to write one, and that was one of the first ones I did. But I actually decided, that it is more typical of a Poirot story, an Agatha Christie-esque story, to do a closed room murder mystery, very much because, of course, it's reliant upon psychology and all of those other things. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be fun if Sherlock Holmes had to investigate a closed room murder mystery? And so I wrote one called The Second Door. And in order to do it, you still have to put all the elements that people expect of Sherlock Holmes, the clues, the footprints, the this, that, and everything else. But essentially no one leaves. And the discussion is all around the people who are there. And the solution is with the people who were there. And it was fun, but it was very hard. And so unlike the other books, I had to know in advance who, what, where, and when. And that's tougher.
And you constantly have to, you're revisiting the same physical locations and details over and over and over. And you've got to I'm doing it now. I'm like, wait, they're in one space. I'm like, wait, am I on the right floor? Am I in the right room?
I had to draw a map.
Right, that's exactly right. Did the staircases go to the right place? Did I actually connect the dots the right way? The
doors went either way, and how far it would be for each person. Oh, yeah.
That's right. Okay, well, that was great, guys. But now it's a time on special segment on the show where we spin the wheel. On the wheel are 7 possible categories, which I created just for this panel. Wherever it lands is what you get. And the categories are Cold Case, Hell on Wheels, Drink Up, Magical Mystery Tour, Name That Quote, The Greatest Mystery of All, and everyone's new favorite, Kick Him in the Junk. All right, Chris, you're up first. You ready?
Yep.
All right, here we go. Round and round. Where she goes, we'll see. Okay, what mysteries does the wheel have for you tonight? All right, and you got... Okay, you got Magical Mystery Tour. All right, this is a brand new one just for today. All right, so the original version of the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour album only had 6 songs. Magical Mystery Tour, Fool on the Hill, Flying, Blue Jay Way, I Am the Walrus, and Your Mother Should Know. Which one is your favorite?
I like the Beatles.
That's it. I'm kicking you off the show.
I've never listened to it. I have no idea.
That's it. You're out.
I'm sorry.
You're a Brit who plays guitar and you don't know.
I don't know them at all. I'm sorry. I never really listened. I mean, I know a couple of songs.
Oh, good Lord. You know what? I thought I knew you.
That's why they made me go to America.
You're done. That's it. I've had enough of you. What kind of a Brit are you? Jesus. All right. You're really fucking me up tonight, Chris.
I'm sorry.
You guys are really, all right, fine. All right, Mickey, you ready? You have to make up for his
Oh, the pressure's on.
No pressure.
Yes, the pressure's on.
Thanks, Chris.
You got to score big. No. Come on.
Of all the questions, it had to have been a Beatles one.
All right. So what do we got here? Whoops, did I do that wrong? Oh my God.
So I get a pass.
Okay. You don't get okay, you got Drink Up. Okay, so what do we got here? And I'm sorry.
Lansha.
Give me 1 second. Where is it? Here it is. Okay. So, all right, here's an old mystery. A serial killer kidnaps people and makes them take one of 2 pills. One was harmless and the other is poisonous. Whichever pill the victim took, the serial killer took the other one. The victim took their pill with water and died while the killer survived. How does the killer always get the harmless pill?
Well, if you go back to The Princess Bride, then it's a matter of, do I do this? And did I actually like immunize myself by taking small doses until you built up a tolerance for it? I'm going Princess Bride argument.
And I'm going to say you blew it. Both pills were harmless. The poison was in the glass. All right.
Ooh, excellent.
There you go. All right, Bruce, you're up. Let's see. All right, and what do you got? And you're
Come
gonna.
on, Bruce.
All right,
You have to
you got to bring it home. You guys are.
It's all on you now, Bruce.
Why didn't I get the Beatle question is what I want.
Okay.
You might still.
All right,
Right.
so Bruce, you got name that quote. You ready?
All right, got it.
All right, so here it is. Let me find it. Okay. Death is a mystery and burial is a secret. Name that quote. Who said it?
Boy, that sounds like Edgar Allan Poe.
It's
That's my
actually,
guess.
it's actually Stephen King
Oh,
from Pet Sematary.
Jesus, I've read all those too. I got to go
Ah.
back and read that again.
You know, the three for three mystery writers and two ex-cops, you guys are really not, you're not showing up to play today.
Bad.
All
Didn't
right.
do our
All right.
research.
All right. Well, sticking with the mystery theme, now we're gonna pick your poison. I've got three choices for you, A, B, and C, and I'm not going to tell you what's behind each one, including some new categories I created. All right, Bruce, A, B, or C. What do you pick?
B.
B. All right, we're going to give you some truth serum. I'm going to ask you 10 questions. Answer quickly. You ready?
Jesus. All right, go ahead.
Favorite flavor ice cream?
Vanilla.
Pineapple on pizza? Yay or nay?
Nay.
Bucket list destination anywhere in the world?
Grand Canyon.
Scariest movie you ever saw?
Exorcist, the first one.
Ooh, that is scary. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Mind reading.
Ooh, good one. I like it. Do you play any musical instruments? And if not, which one if you could?
No, drums.
Drums. All right. I'm a drummer myself. All right. You can only have one: perpetually fantastic good luck or very solid skills.
Oh, I'd love some luck. That would be cool. Yeah, luck would be good.
All right.
My
Cats or-
wife's the lucky one in my house, not me.
Okay. All right. Cats or dogs?
Oh, what'd you say? I'm sorry.
Cats or dogs?
I love both, but I'm gonna say dog.
Okay. I'm a both myself. All right. You can see a live performance, sports, music, theater, whatever you want, any seat, any venue. What's your choice?
The Beatles live.
Where? Where?
Ooh.
Did you
What
say
would-
where?
Where?
Oh, I got to see him in probably what, Wembley Stadium.
Okay. Oh, all right. All right. And last one. Within your lifetime, if you could have one do-over, what would it be?
Oh, wasting 2.5 years writing the drawer novel.
You said no. You said earlier that it wasn't a waste. You said
I
that.
lied. Everybody
Oh,
lies.
you see, I told you everybody lies. See, even the ex-cops, probably most of all. All right, Mickey, what do you got?
Oh, can I have B? I like those questions.
Okay, you just got B. He just had B, so you have A or C.
All right, C.
All right, so yours is success or bust. Okay, writers often talk about, think about, and are asked about what it means to be successful. But every writer has their own definition of success, which may change at various stages in your writing career. Given where you are today, what is your definition of success as a writer? And how does that definition compare, if at all, to when you first started writing seriously?
Oh gosh, it's a moving goalpost. I know Bruce had mentioned earlier that you're told not to try to, necessarily beat your last novel, but I can't help but want to do that. I want every one of my stories to be more engaging, more clever, but I remember, at first it's like, oh gosh, I got a great response to a pass from an agent, but it was complimentary. That was a win. You have to celebrate those little milestones. And then it was, I got an agent. Well, now what to be successful? Okay, well, they sold the book. Okay, now what? Well, I got a 2-book deal. Now what? Well, I won a contest or I won an award. But the fact that I still have fun writing books, that's a success.
All right.
And I think as long as I can continue enjoying what I do, I'm successful.
All right, fair enough. All right, Chris, you're up next. So you got the last one, which is old dog, new tricks. The saying goes that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, yet every writer I know, including myself, has made numerous mistakes along the way in their writing careers. What's one mistake you made that hurt like hell at the time, but you learned from and endeavored never to make again?
Oh, I think the mistake I made was I wrote a series of books, a series of fantasy books, believe it or not. And I know this is not fantasy related, but it is a mistake that I made. I had a certain voice for the first book. And when I wrote the second book, I didn't go back and reread the first one enough to recognize that I had written the second book in an entirely different voice. It is obvious when you go from book one to book two that they're the same characters, of course, but the only saving grace was that it was a number of years later, and so I could kind of arguably say there was a certain change. But the reality is that I just missed it. I missed the concept of my original design, and so looking back on that now, one of the things it does make me do now, of course, now I write independent stories generally, and they don't relate to the next, but I do go back and read them when I write the next book, just to make sure that I keep certain elements of my own voice intact, because I made a huge mistake with that, and it's very noticeable.
All right, fair enough. All right, so we have a little time. I'm going to take some questions from the audience. I got one for anyone who wants to answer. Okay, favorite mystery thriller movie or TV series? Why?
Broadchurch. To me, that's one of the best plotted stories in recent time that I've seen on television.
How many seasons? I saw the first one. There was at least one other one, right?
I think there was at least two. Yeah. David Tennant and the lead. And I can't think of her name.
Olivia Colman.
Yeah, she unbelievable, both of them. But the plotting was just unbelievable. Every time you thought you had a good handle on what was happening, right, another twist would come.
That's right. Mickey, what about you?
I just started watching, How to Get Away with Murder. And it's like 6 seasons in, but for whatever reason, I had never seen it. And it's actually really engaging. And so I've been enjoying that most recently.
Okay. Been taking notes for your personal life? No. Just kidding.
Look at my browser history.
Okay, fair enough.
Don't look at mine. Wow. I think my answer would be I like period stuff, because that way I don't have to worry about the CSI element. I don't have to worry about learning too much about that. So I do like to watch more period based stuff, and I've been watching Ripper Street, which I've really enjoyed, as a police procedural, but set in the 19th, the early 20th century. Was really, really cool. Oh no, the late 19th century, sorry. But it's fun, and it's fun because of course you're seeing it from the perspective of writers who are writing for that Dickensian style rather than the Conan Doyle style 19th century, because Conan Doyle's 19th century is very clean and tidy, and Dickens is very much as it was, nasty and pretty vile in places. And I like that Ripper Street has got that element to it. So yeah, that's one I've been watching.
I actually just I
was going to say, speaking of that, Dickensian that you just mentioned, I don't know if you guys saw that, but that to me, that was one of the most clever things I've seen recently. And it was all the Dickens characters from every book in one murder mystery. And I can't remember how many episodes, but it was incredible. It was very, very good.
All right, so a couple more and then we'll wrap up. So The Alienist was a fantastic mystery TV series, but with a horror element. I'm not big on horror, but there can be a fine line. How would the authors cross that line? Would they feel the need to cross that line? It's interesting. I'm finding that in each one of my novels, I'm actually adding a little bit more horror elements into them, and the readers seem to be responding. What about you guys? Do you go into that sort of, a space that would be considered horror in any element, or it's just you don't go that deep?
I don't remember the book having that tremendous
I don't know.
of a horror aspect. Caleb Carr's book, The Alienist.
I mean, but even so, put the alienist aside. I mean,
Okay.
even in your own work, do you think?
I'm adding more horror, but I don't like gratuitous violence. I like more the psychological, more the suspense, more the, is this going to be a paranormal issue? I think sometimes what you leave out is more frightening than what you blatantly display.
Mm. I have to say I've written horror, so I have a sci-fi horror movie which is mostly gratuitous violence. So when it comes to but when it comes to my mystery stories, I don't think it's necessary. I mean, I think I don't think you need to describe anything. When Holmes comes across a body that's dead on the floor and he does his analysis of it, it's just, it doesn't have to be descriptive to the point where you close your eyes. And there is a horror element to a lot of these Sherlock Holmes stories. If you've read the original Hound of the Baskervilles, I mean, there was an element of horror in that story that wasn't like a horror movie, but it was enough to make you, this is scary. There are parts of this that's scary, and the way that Holmes reacts to it and the way that Watson reacts to it is the scare. So I think that's what I try and go for, more of that.
All right,
More of that sort of film.
one more on the completely opposite spectrum. Is there a place for humor in mysteries?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I think it breaks the tension.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
And if you've ever spent any time with cops, they have the gallows humor, and some of it is just downright just funny.
Or anybody from emergency services.
Right.
I worked in the hospitals for a while, as a certified nursing assistant, and I can tell you, their nursing and doctor humor is just as terrible, I imagine.
All right, guys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and I got some stuff to share, and then we're going to call it a night. All right. So give me 1 second. Let's make sure I do this right. I rarely do. All right, here we go. Okay. So Bruce, what do we got? Talk to me.
Within Plain Sight, that's the fourth novel in the Detective Byron mystery series. And you mentioned horror. There's no horror in there, but I can tell you something really heinous happens to the victim in this case.
All right, fair enough. Sounds good. All right. All right, Chris, what do we got?
This is my Sherlock Holmes story that I tried to catch the element of the Hound of the Baskervilles by having a potential tiger as the main villain, if you like. But yeah, it is a story about it's set in Holmes's first year with Watson, so it's a very early case, and the Watson and Holmes dynamic is not as strong because they've only been together a year. So that was my idea. All my other stories are set much later on in there, and they're much closer friends. But in this, there's a little tension between the two of them.
All right, very nice. Okay, Mickey, what do we got?
Mercy Creek. It's the second in the Joe Wyatt series, and it's about a missing persons investigation. And because it's set in a small town, it's actually more about the exploration of relationships that she's had with the family of the missing person, and how that can both help and hinder the investigation.
All right, very cool, very cool. All right, folks, and as for me, if you're up for a little sci-fi with your mystery, I'll encourage you to check out Hot Ash, the third novel in my ongoing series featuring hard-boiled private detective Angela Hardwick. I see her as part Blade Runner, part Philip Marlowe, and as a recent reviewer said, and God bless him for saying so, a spiritual cousin to J.D. Robb's In Death series. In Hot Ash, Hardwick is hired by a middle-aged widow who claims that her stepkids stole her deceased husband's real estate empire from her and wants help getting it back. The investigation leads Hardwick to a new form of cocaine and a majestic dome city covering up a horrifying secret. Hot Ash is available on Amazon, published by Crazy 8 Press. All right, that's our show. I want to thank Bruce and Mickey and Chris for coming on tonight and being all mysterious. And I want to thank everyone who's watching at home. And if you want to see me in person for my final convention of the year, I will be at PhilCon in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, the weekend of November 18th, where it just so happens I will be sharing a table with Christopher Abbott. So until then, as always, I'll see you all next week. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you,
very much.
Russ.
Peace.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And I'll see you soon.